Hi, in this video we're gonna use the new UI layers feature that was added in 2024.13. So go update if you haven't done so already, and do take a backup of your project before updating GameMaker or use source control. In this video we're gonna make a simple pause menu with 3 buttons and a settings menu that you can access through the pause menu, and you can go back and forth between these menus. In this video, we're going to be making all the buttons and everything ourselves by using the new UI layers feature. But going forward, we are gradually going to be releasing prefabs that are pre-created buttons and other UI widgets that you can just drag and drop into your UI layers. So that's going to make this process even easier. So I'll make a separate video for that when that's released. But in this video, we're going to be doing everything from scratch using the new UI layers feature. So how do these new UI layers work? A UI layer is simply a container called a flex container, or in GameMaker, a flex panel. You can put more flex panels inside the layer and have multiple of them next to each other. Then you can put more flex panels inside the flex panels, and so on and so forth. So what is the point of putting these flex panels, these boxes, inside of each other? The point is for GameMaker to sort and lay out your flex panels according to the settings you set for each container. For example, you can ask the main layer panel to sort the panels as columns, so they'll be sorted vertically. Then you can add a gap between them. You can add a padding to the layer container. So according to your settings, GameMaker has gone and sorted these panels for you. And then you can go and do this with each panel. Let's say for this panel, you ask it to sort its panel by row. So they'll be laid out horizontally, and then you can go and adjust the other settings to get them to look the way you want. By doing all of this, you can design your interfaces and also define how they behave if the size of the window changes so that they are responsive. Now, because you have your panels defined and sorted, you can now put your sprites inside them, or put your objects inside them, or put text. This way you can define what is displayed inside each panel, and if it's an object, then you can add mouse events to it to define its behavior, like what happens when you click on a button. So by using this combination of panels and assets inside them, you can design your interfaces. Once you have a layer set up and you run your game, these panels appear on top of your game in the GUI layer, so that it's independent from your camera and it always stays on the main screen. With that out of the way, let's go and design our first interface, a simple pause menu with 3 buttons. You can use any game for this tutorial as your base project. I'm gonna be using the RPG project from our RPG tutorial series and adding a pause menu to this. So first of all, go to the description of this video and download the YYMPS file. This is a package that contains the sprites you're gonna need for this tutorial. So once you have the file, drag and drop it into your GameMaker window, and here click on yes, then select add all and then imports. So this package is gonna give you a font that we're gonna use for our interface, and then a few sprites as well. On these panel sprites, I've already enabled 9 slicing and set that up. So if you resize the sprite, it will maintain its corners and edges. It's the same for the button sprites as well. So if you are using your own sprites for this tutorial, make sure you have 9 slicing set up for them. Now let's make an object for our button. So I'll make a new object and call this obj button. I'll give this the button sprite that I just imported. And then under the variables, I'm going to create a new variable called button_id, so we can set what each button does when we place it inside a UI layer. Now let's go and open our game room because UI layers are designed inside the room editor. Let's go to the add layers menu and here add a new UI layer. When you do this, you're going to see a UI folder created here. This is what stores all of the UI layers in your game, and you can see the actual UI layer in this menu over here. Now one really important thing to know is that UI layers are global, meaning they are shared across all of your rooms in your project. So any UI layers you create in your project are going to be created at the start of your game at runtime, and they're going to be available throughout your game for you to switch them on and off as you need them. We have our first UI layer here, so let's start designing it. I need a panel for the pause menu. So I'll go to this sprite and drag and drop this inside the UI layer. You'll see it creates a flex panel and it puts the sprite inside the flex panel. That's how we're going to be designing our UI throughout this video, where every asset, whether it's a sprite or object or text, is placed inside a flex panel of its own. Here I want to give this flex panel a fixed size and make the sprite inside it stretch to fit that panel. So I'll click on the flex panel, and in the settings here, I'll change the type of the size to pixels, and I'll set the width to 300 pixels and the height to 400 pixels. The panel has resized here, but the sprite inside it is still in its original size. So let's select the sprite here, then go to the settings, and at the bottom, set the stretch property to both, so it stretches itself to fit its parent container both horizontally and vertically. And now you can see the sprite is filling the whole panel, and the panel itself is appearing at the center of the canvas. If you run the game now, you're gonna see that panel appearing at the top of your game. And if you move the player and that moves the camera, you can see the sprite sticks to the GUI area of your window, so it takes care of that for you. If you go back in the room, you can see it's using the whole size of the room as the GUI canvas area. And if you have a large room, this might be too large of an area to work with. So you can go here and enable this option to use a different size from this list of presets, or you can enter a custom size that you want to use. You can also change the orientation here if you want to see how it will look on mobile devices. So changing the size here will only affect the area that's used inside the room editor to preview your UI layers. But when you run your game, it's the size of the window or the GUI layer that will be used. Now before we go and add more things, I'm gonna rename this panel to say pause panel, just so we can tell what each panel is. Now let's make a button for the pause menu. I'm gonna take the obj button object and drag and drop it inside the pause panel. It's again placed inside its own flex panel. So I'll rename this panel to resume button, because this is going to be the panel storing everything for the resume button. Now we want the button to be sized according to the text that is placed inside it. So for the text, I'm gonna take the font that we imported and drag and drop this inside the resume button panel. You can now see the panel is resizing itself based on the text panel, and that's happening because its size is set to auto. We just need the button to stretch as well, so we're gonna use the same trick that we used before. I'll select the button instance here, and in the settings, I'll set it to stretch in both directions. Now it also covers the area defined by its parent panel. Let's change the name of the panel that contains the text to text, so we can easily tell what it's for. And since both this panel and the button instance are next to each other, their order also matters, so the text needs to be at the top. If you have the button at the top, you're not gonna see the text, so make sure you have the order right. Let's click on the font we added, and in the settings, let's set the text to resume. So that's what the button will say. Now the button is looking very compact, so let's select the text panel. And in the settings, let's go down and add some margin around it. I'll add a margin for the top and bottom edges, and then add a slightly larger margin on the left and right edges, because that's how I want the button to look. And you can see that now the button looks much better than before. If you run the game now, you can see the text appears, but the button instance has disappeared. So this is a side effect of the game that we are using. Let me go into OBJ player and show you what's causing this issue. In the end step event, this code is setting the depth of all instances in the room according to their vertical positions, and that's what's messing up the UI as well. So here we just need to add a condition to make sure that we set the depth only if an instance is not on a UI layer, so it should skip any UI instances. Run the game now, and the button is showing up below the text as we designed it. We can go and add more buttons now. So I'm gonna select the resume button panel and hit Ctrl D twice to create 2 more button panels. You can see in the canvas that the 3 buttons are appearing next to each other vertically, and you didn't have to place them manually. GameMaker takes care of placing them for you. Now they are very close to each other, so let's add a gap between them. Click on the pause panel because that's what contains the buttons, and go into the settings here and give it a vertical gap over here. With that, it looks much better. Let's go and edit these buttons individually now. I'll first change the name of this panel to settings button because that's what this button is for. And then I'll go into the font inside it and change its text to say settings. Then I'll go and do the same for the last button, which should be the quit button. Then I'll change the text for this as well. Before we continue making this interface, I want to show you different ways in which you can align your buttons. Right now they are laid out vertically and being centered in the panel. And if we select pause panel, it's all happening because of these options here. So the vertical layout is based on the direction setting, which is column right now. If you set this to row, they'll be laid out horizontally. So you can do that if you need it for a different kind of menu. Now, because we have set the direction to column, the vertical axis becomes the main axis and the horizontal axis becomes the cross axis. So it's the justify content setting that defines how it's laid out on the main axis, so in our case vertically, and it's the align item setting that defines how it's laid out on the cross axis, so for us horizontally. So if you change the justify content option, you can choose any one of these options to define how it's laid out on the main axis. Then you can also change the align items option to change how it's laid out across the cross axis. If you are aligning it, say this way with it being along an edge, you can see it doesn't look good because it's too close to the edge. You can easily fix that by setting a padding which adds a border inside the panel. And with the padding added, it's gonna look much better. But we're gonna stick to the center alignment as before, so I'm gonna set the settings back to that and also remove the padding. One of the main features of UI layers is that they can be responsive. That means if the game's resolution changes, the UI layers will adapt based on your settings. To test this, I'm gonna go into my game options and enable this so I can change my window size. Now in the game, if I resize my window, right now the UI scales up or down with the window, just like the game render itself, because the size of the GUI layer stays the same. If I make the size of the GUI layer change with the size of the window, then you'll see how our UI elements stay their own size. Just to quickly test this, I'm just gonna go into my player object and make variables to store the width and height of the window. Then in the step event, I'll check if the width or height of the window has changed. And in that case, I'll call the display set GUI maximize function, which sets the size of the GUI layer to the current size of the window. And just to remove any confusion, when I talk about the GUI layer, I'm talking about the singular rendering layer of the window where all UI is rendered, and that's where the draw GUI events draw as well. So UI layers are separate as they are a new feature, but the GUI layer has always been there and it draws above the game. So we are talking about the size of that GUI layer, which then changes the resolution at which all your UI layers are rendered. Now I'll run the game and make the window larger. You'll see the menu stays at the same size it was, so now it takes up less of the area. If I make the window smaller, it still maintains its size, and now it's taking up more of the window because it's smaller. So the menu is maintaining its size because in the editor, we have given this panel a fixed size. So as the size of the GUI layer changes, this panel maintains the exact pixel size that you've given it. Now you can play around with this size and maybe make it a percentage of the container. And you can also play around with the minimum and maximum sizes to control how your panels resize based on the size of their containers. Now that we have the pause menu visible and laid out, let's make it so we can toggle the pause menu by pressing escape. I'm going to make a new object and call this obj pause manager. Let's open the room and make sure we place this here inside the instances layer. Then I'll open the UI folder. And for the UI layer that we made here, let's rename this to pause layer. we're going to use this same name inside our code to make the layer visible and invisible. Let's go back into obj pause manager and set up the pausing. Let's add the create event, and here I'm going to make a variable called paused, which stores whether the game is paused or not. Then let's make a variable to store the name of the paused layer. Then I'll make a function that runs whenever we pause or unpause the game to control what happens in each case. So if the game is paused, then I'll run this function to deactivate all the instances in the room, and I'll pass true as the argument so that this instance of obj pause manager is not deactivated because we need it running to unpause the game later. Then let's call layer set visible to make the pause layer visible. This is how you can turn a UI layer on or off. And keep in mind that when you do turn a UI layer off, all the instances on that layer will be deactivated, which is different from how it works on normal layers where they are just made invisible, but they are still running their events. On UI layers, if you make a UI layer invisible, any instances inside it will not run any of their events anymore. Now, in case the game is unpaused, we'll run this function to reactivate all instances, and then we'll make the pause layer invisible. Now back in the create event, I'm going to call this function so that it sees that the game is unpaused and it makes the pause layer invisible. Now let's add the step event. Here I'll do a simple check just to see if the escape key was pressed, and if it was, we'll set paused to the opposite value of the same variable. So if it's true, it becomes false and vice versa. Then we call the update pause function to apply any changes from that. Now run the game, the pause menu won't appear by default. Press escape and the game stops. You can't move anymore and the pause menu appears. You can press escape again to make the UI invisible and go back into the game. Now we have the buttons placed already, so we can now add code to them to make them functional. Let's go into obj button and start by coding what happens when you hover over a button. For that, I'll add the mouse enter event. And when the mouse enters the instance's mask area, let's set the image alpha to 0.5 to make it transparent. Then let's add the mouse leave event. So when the mouse leaves the instance's area, we reset the image alpha back to 1. With this, if you run the game and pause it, you'll see that the hover effect is now working. For what happens when we click on a button, let's add the left released event. So this runs when we release the left mouse button on top of this instance. Here I'll add a switch statement so I can control what code runs based on the value of button ID. I'll add cases for IDs 0, 1 and 2. Since 0 is the resume button, we want it to unpause the game. So from the obj pause manager instance, we want to set paused to false. And then from the same instance, we want to call the update pause function. Then let's jump over to case 2, which is the quit button. Here I'll just call the game end function. We haven't set the IDs yet, so let's go back into the room editor. Make sure you select the button object that you added in the buttons flex panel, and you can change the variable from here. For the resume button instance, it's already set to 0, so that's fine. I'll select the instance for the settings button and here set the ID to 1, and then I'll go to the quit button and for this instance set the ID to 2. So run the game, and with the resume button we can now unpause the game, and with the quit button we can exit. So our pause menu with all the buttons inside it is now working. Our interface is now finished. In this section we are gonna add icons next to the text for each button. I have this sprite for the resume button, so I'll drag this and drop it inside the flex panel for that button. It's gonna appear here inside a new panel, so I'll name that panel icon. You can see that it's appearing in a column layout, so let's select the resume button panel and set the direction here to row. It's looking much better now, and we can also add a padding, so I'll go ahead and do that. This is done now, so now we can go and repeat the same process for the other buttons. And the menu looks much better now with the icons next to the text. In this section, we're gonna make a settings menu, which for this example won't have any functional settings, but we'll focus on the layout and how we can switch from the pause menu into the settings menu and back. Before we make the UI, let's make a new object and call this obj checkbox. We're gonna use this in the settings menu. I'm gonna add the create event and here make a variable to store whether this is enabled or not. Then I'll add the left released event. And here let's flip the enabled variable whenever we click on the button. Let's set the image alpha of the instance based on the value of its enabled variable. With that out of the way, let's design our UI now. In the editor, I'm gonna make the pause layer invisible and make a new UI layer. I'll rename this new UI layer to settings layer. From the sprites, I'll drag this for the main settings panel. I'll set the panel sprite to stretch in both axes. I'll rename this flex panel to panel. Then I'll set its size to 100% in both axes, so it covers the whole container. And in the game, it does that exactly, but it would be good to have a border around it. So I'll select the parent panel, which is the layer itself, and here add a padding. And now it looks much better. So it is covering 100% of the parent's area minus the padding. Now I need a back button inside this panel. So I'll go into my pause layer and duplicate one of these buttons. Then I'll move this into the panel that we just made, so we now have a button here. I'll rename this to back button. Then I'll set the text in the font to back. And you can see that it's appearing in the center, but that's not what I want. I'll select the panel and in the inspector, set the justify content and align items to flex start. Then I'll add a padding so it gives it a bit of a border on the inside. For the button instance that is inside the button panel, let's set the button ID to 3 because we already have 0, 1 and 2 in the pause menu. Now we want to add some settings, so inside the panel, I'll create a new flex panel. I'll call this setting. I'll set its width to 100% and the height to auto so that this will be based on the contents inside. Now from the asset browser, I'm going to drag the font and put this inside the settings panel. I'll rename this new panel to text, and for the text itself, I'll write something that resembles a setting. Now we need to add the checkbox, and I realize I haven't given it a sprite yet, so I'm going to select that object and give it the checkbox sprite from the package we imported. Now I'll drag the checkbox object and drop it inside the panel for the setting. I'll put it after the text. It's appearing as a column here too, so I'll select the setting panel and set the direction to row. Then I'll set the justify content, so the spacing on the main axis, which here is horizontal, to space between. Now you can see it looks how you would expect a settings menu to look, with the text on the left side and the checkbox on the right side. Now we can duplicate this setting panel to create multiple settings in the menu. Then I'm gonna select the panel and in the inspector add a vertical gap so it looks better. Now this is where we are done designing our basic settings menu, so let's see how we can activate it in game. First let's go into obj pause manager. In the create event, I'm gonna make the settings layer invisible so it doesn't appear right at the start. Then let's go into obj button. Here in the left released event, let's program what happens for the settings button, which is ID1. Here I'm gonna make two function calls. First to make the pause layer invisible and then to make the settings layer visible. After that, let's add a case for ID3, which is the back button inside the settings menu. Here we're gonna do the opposite of what we just did, making the pause layer visible and the settings layer invisible. So this way, by calling these functions, you can enable and disable your UI layers to display the menu that you want to display at any given time. Now let's go back into obj pause manager, and in the create event, I want to update the update pause function. This is just to make sure that if we press escape and unpause the game from anywhere, then the settings layer is also made invisible at that time. With this, let's run the game, and in the pause menu, press settings. The settings menu will open. Here you can press back to go back into the pause menu. And from the settings menu, you can also press escape and jump directly back into the game. This is gonna be responsive as well, so if you resize the window, it will still cover the whole GUI area and maintain that fixed padding that we added around it. But of course, this is only a start, and there's a lot of settings you can adjust to make your responsive behavior even better. First of all, like with anything, go and read the manual because there's a lot here that we haven't covered. Like you can enable your UI layers to draw onto a viewport instead of the GUI layer if you have multiple viewports. And you can read about the runtime draw order here. I'll link this page in the description. You can also watch the live stream that I did on UI layers, which for its first half covers everything that we did in this video, and in its second half it covers some more examples and more ways to make your UI responsive. There is a GitHub issue with sample projects that you can download and import and see how different types of interfaces were implemented using UI layers. And like I mentioned before, going forward, we're gonna be releasing prefabs with pre-built UI objects, so that'll make this process much easier. I'll do a video on that when they are available. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions or you want to request a specific type of tutorial using UI layers, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. GameMaker.